Nightmare tales. The unknown awaits.
I received my official license as a mortuary scientist and embalmer back in 2009 after finishing my studies at the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science. For 13 years, I served at the Riverside Memorial Chapel in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a funeral home that managed around 200 cases annually, ranging from natural deaths to terrible accidents. I had handled bodies pulled from the cold Tennessee River, prepared victims of gun violence, reconstructed faces destroyed in car crashes, and supported thousands of families through their absolute worst moments. I truly believed I had encountered every conceivable form of human mortality. I was convinced that nothing could shatter my detached, clinical understanding of death, certain that my training and procedures could account for everything that occurred on my preparation table. Then, on March 8, 2022, Eleanor Voss was brought to me, and every belief I held about the definitive nature of death was instantly invalidated. I submitted my resignation 4 months later and have not been inside a funeral home since. The preparation room at Riverside was a fluorescent-lit, sterile space located in the basement, secured from the viewing areas by 2 locked doors. The porcelain embalming table sat directly under surgical lamps, surrounded by cabinets holding trocars, arterial pump machines, and sterilization equipment that maintained a constant low hum. I had spent countless hours in that room, and it always felt like a fortress of order, a reliable place where profound disorder was systematically transformed into peace. The powerful, distinct scent of formaldehyde and phenol stopped affecting me years ago, and the sheer weight of my duty had become familiar and almost comforting. I was excellent at my profession, perhaps overly confident in my command over all post-mortem processes. The room was 20 by 15 feet, with walls covered in white subway tile designed for complete sanitation after every case. A large stainless steel utility sink was in the corner, next to cabinets stocked with arterial fluid bottles coded by color. Pink for routine cases, high-index solutions for difficult situations, and special fluid for patients with liver failure. Eleanor Voss was 73 when she passed away from congestive heart failure at Erlanger Hospital on March 7, 2022, at 11:47 p.m. Her daughter, Rebecca Voss Chen, contacted us the next morning, requesting a standard viewing and subsequent burial at Chattanooga National Cemetery. It was a routine case. The body arrived at 2:15 p.m. in a sealed transport shroud, along with the required death certificate signed by her doctor, Ramesh Kulkarni. The documented cause was cardiac arrest, secondary to chronic heart failure. Time elapsed since death was approximately 14 hours. Her body temperature had already adjusted to the ambient room temperature, and the hospital report indicated nothing unusual. I began the external assessment at 2:30 p.m., executing the procedure I had performed thousands of times. Eleanor was 5'4", about 130 pounds, with bright white hair, and showed the expected mottled livor mortis, blood pooling across her back. The gravity-driven blood was exactly where it should be after 14 hours lying supine. Her eyes were slightly ajar, glazed over with the typical post-mortem film. Rigor mortis was complete, making her limbs stiff, though still manageable using standard manipulation techniques. Everything was precisely what the textbook described. I found no injuries, no evidence of trauma, and no unusual discoloration beyond normal post-mortem changes. Her medical bracelet noted a pacemaker, which would require documentation and removal prior to any cremation, though she was scheduled for burial. Her fingernails displayed slight cyanosis, the blue-gray shade common in cardiac-related fatalities. Her skin felt waxy, as expected after this amount of time. At 3:05 p.m., I made the initial incision along the right clavicle to access the carotid artery and jugular vein for the embalming process. The scalpel sliced smoothly through the cooling tissue. I isolated the common carotid artery, lifted it with my aneurysm hook, and made a small cut to insert the cannula. This is where all logic vanished. When I severed the artery, fresh blood pulsed out. Not the thick, gelled post-mortem blood I should have seen after 14 hours. Not the dark, separated serum and clotted cells that define clinical death. Bright red, oxygenated blood, actually pumped rhythmically from the arterial opening, splashing onto my gloves and the drainage tray. I recoiled instantly, my mind scrambling for any possible explanation. There is no such thing as post-mortem blood pressure. The heart is off. Pressure stabilizes. Blood settles. There is no known physiological mechanism for arterial blood to pulsate from a body 14 hours deceased. I checked her carotid pulse point with my fingers. Nothing. I pressed my stethoscope to her chest, listening intently for any activity. Absolute silence. I reread the hospital paperwork. Time of death confirmed. Physician's signature present. No mention of extended resuscitation efforts or delayed declaration of death. Eleanor Voss was clinically and legally dead. Yet, fresh, liquid blood continued to seep from the wound, though now more slowly. I had seen post-mortem purge before. Decomposition gases forcing fluid from body cavities. But this was different. Purge is dark, foul-smelling, and mixed with stomach contents. This was clean arterial blood, the kind that only moves in living circulation. I applied pressure to control the bleeding, then inserted the arterial cannula and connected it to the embalming pump. The Porty Boy pump whirred to life. Set to inject 2 gallons of the formaldehyde solution at 18 pounds of pressure. The fluid should have met resistance from coagulated blood and required manipulation to travel through the system. Instead, the arterial fluid flowed through her body as easily as water through new plumbing. The pressure gauge stayed steady and optimal. Her tissues firmed up beautifully, color returning perfectly to her face and hands. In 23 years, I had never witnessed such quick and total arterial distribution in a body that had been post-mortem for this long. It was as if her entire vascular system remained functional, responsive, and somehow still alive, despite every clinical sign pointing to death. The formaldehyde should have taken a minimum of 45 minutes to distribute properly, given the time elapsed. Eleanor's tissues took the solution in under 20 minutes. At 3:47 p.m., while I was closing the arterial incision, Eleanor's left hand moved. It wasn't a gas spasm or the subtle settling that happens during the process. Her fingers curled slowly inward into a loose, deliberate fist, and then relaxed again. The movement was coordinated, intentional, and utterly impossible. I backed away from the table, my heart pounding. Embalmed bodies do not move. The formaldehyde solution, I just saturated her system with denatures proteins, fixes tissues, and eliminates any chance of muscle function. There is zero neurological explanation for voluntary motion after arterial embalming. Jesus Christ, I whispered to the empty room. I stood watching for a minute. Nothing further. I checked her pupils with my penlight, fixed and dilated, unresponsive. I checked the carotid, no pulse. I listened to her chest, absolute silence. I was totally alone in the basement. Only the ventilation hummed and the lights buzzed. The temperature was 68 degrees Fahrenheit, my ideal working condition. Professional standards required me to finish. I started cavity aspiration at 4:10 p.m., inserting the long metal trocar into her abdomen, to draw gases and fluids from her thoracic and abdominal cavities. The trocar easily passed through the tissue, and I activated the suction. Dark fluid from the stomach, intestines, and bladder was pulled out, all normal findings. Then I angled the trocar up toward the chest cavity. The trocar struck something solid, something that should not have been solid. I adjusted the angle and tried again. The same resistance. I pulled the trocar out and examined the tip. No obstruction or mechanical failure. I reinserted it, watching the depth marker closely. The trocar should have slid smoothly into the chest space between the lungs and heart. Instead, it met firm resistance precisely where Eleanor's heart was. It felt like pressing the trocar against stone. Hearts do not turn rock hard 14 hours after death. They soften, become flaccid, and are easily punctured. I had aspirated thousands of hearts and never met this resistance. I tried 3 more times, using more force and adjusting the angle. The trocar would not pierce the heart. It seemed the organ had calcified into a solid mass, which was physically impossible in this time frame. I even switched the instrument for a new, sharp trocar, just in case. The new instrument met the same impenetrable obstruction. I finished the cavity aspiration around the obstruction, injected cavity fluid, and sealed the puncture. My hands were shaking. I continued surface preservation, applying cream and positioning her features, operating on autopilot while my mind desperately searched for a medical explanation. Extreme cardiac calcification? That would be in her chart. Post-mortem artifact? Nothing in mortuary science described this. At 5:30 p.m., as I was setting her facial features with eye caps and a mouth former, Eleanor's eyes opened. Both eyelids retracted simultaneously and smoothly, revealing the same clouded corneas. They did not focus or track. There were no signs of awareness. But they opened with the same deliberate quality as the hand movement, as if responding to some unknowable internal signal. I was staring directly into her face, less than 2 feet away. I knew what I saw. "Eleanor," my voice cracked. "Mrs. Voss?" No response. Her eyes remained open, fixed on the ceiling. I reached out and manually closed them with shaking fingers. They remained closed. I waited, slowly exhaling, trying to rationalize it as a late muscle spasm or a strange chemical interaction. I finished preparing her features, dressed her in the blue gown her daughter provided, applied cosmetics, and transferred her to the refrigerated holding unit at 6:45 p.m. The unit maintains a standard 40 degrees Fahrenheit until viewing. I shut the heavy stainless steel door and stood there, trying to regain my composure. The unit was a walk-in freezer for 6 bodies, and Eleanor was on the central tray. I left a voicemail for Dr. Kulkarni asking about Eleanor's final hours and meticulously documented all my observations in private notes, not the official report. I knew how impossible it would sound. I cleaned the room, washing her blood from the tray, and tried to convince myself I had misinterpreted normal post-mortem events. The viewing was scheduled for March 10th, 2 days later. I arrived at 7 a.m. to move Eleanor to the viewing parlor. When I opened the holding unit door, her eyes were open again. Not only that, her head was turned about 30 degrees to the right, facing the interior wall of the unit. Her right arm was no longer crossed over her chest where I had placed it, but extended slightly toward the door. The dress and makeup were perfect, but her body had undeniably shifted position inside a sealed, refrigerated space where movement is thermodynamically impossible. I immediately called my colleague, James Okafor. He arrived 20 minutes later, and we stood before the open unit, staring at Eleanor's repositioned body. "Did you put her facing right?" James asked. "Face up, arms crossed, exactly as in the photos," I replied. I showed him the photographs I took after dressing her. Clear images showing her face up, arms crossed, eyes closed. Temperature is constant 38 degrees. James confirmed, checking the digital readout. No interruptions in cooling, seal integrity intact. Nobody else has access but us. We moved Eleanor to a gurney and brought her back to the preparation room. Under the bright lights, we re-examined her. She was properly embalmed, but her neck showed clear rotation with slight creasing where her head had turned. Her right shoulder joint displayed compression patterns consistent with having held that position. Bodies don't move in refrigeration, James stated, recognizing the obvious. Rigor mortis is gone, and the embalming fluid has set the tissues. There is no mechanism for this. I know, I replied. You know what this sounds like? James continued softly. It sounds like someone moved her, like someone broke into the unit. The seal wasn't broken, the security logs show no entry, and you see what I see, I argued. Those compression patterns are not from someone repositioning a body. They're from sustained pressure. Like she held that position for hours. We repositioned her face up, closed her eyes more securely with adhesive, and crossed her arms tightly. Neither of us spoke the terrifying implication. This defied all mortuary science. We moved her to the viewing parlor, arranged her in the open casket, and surrounded her with flowers for the family. The viewing started at 2 p.m., with about 40 people attending. At 3:15 p.m., Rebecca Voss Chen approached me outside the parlor, her face white. "Mr. Anderson," she whispered. My mother's eyes keep opening. My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, what?" During the viewing, I've been sitting right beside her, and twice now her eyes have opened, just slightly, like she's trying to wake up. Other people noticed, my aunt and several of Mom's friends. We keep closing them, but they open again. I returned with Rebecca. Eleanor looked peaceful, eyes closed. I watched discreetly. 12 minutes later, as a group paid their respects, Eleanor's left eyelid twitched, then slowly opened halfway. An older woman gasped and stepped back. Rebecca quickly and gently closed her mother's eye, murmuring apologies. This occurred 4 more times in the next 3 hours. Each time, I tried stronger adhesive, more aggressive eye cap placement, everything in my arsenal. Nothing held for more than 20 minutes. By the 5 p.m. conclusion, at least 15 people had witnessed the repeated opening of Eleanor's eyes. The family politely attributed it to normal settling, but I saw the disturbed glances and the quiet conversations. The burial took place the next morning at Chattanooga National Cemetery. Cold wind, gray sky, with full military honors for her late husband. I stayed at the gravesite long after the family left, watching the crew lower Eleanor's casket and then seal the vault and fill the grave. I watched the entire 90-minute process until the earth was fully covered. 2 weeks later, another body arrived with similar impossibilities. Gerald Hoffman, 67, dead from diabetes complications on March 22nd. When I made the arterial incision, fresh blood pulsed out, the same impossible phenomenon as with Eleanor. His tissues distributed the embalming fluid with the same unnatural speed. During aspiration, the trocar hit the same rock-hard obstruction when trying to pierce his heart. Then, Gerald's right foot rotated outward 30 degrees while I worked on his face. I called James immediately, and together we saw Gerald's jaw shift slightly, muscles tensing and relaxing despite the formaldehyde saturation. James filmed 3 minutes of footage showing the subtle but undeniable facial muscle movement. "We need to report this," James said. "Report what? That dead bodies are moving? To who?" The medical examiner will think we've gone mad. The families will sue us, I replied. Then what do? We document everything, keep records, and try to find an understanding. The third case, Linda Kowalski, 54, sudden cardiac arrest, arrived on April 9th. Same fresh arterial blood, same impenetrable heart, same subtle muscle twitches. A finger movement here, a facial contraction there. Always small enough to doubt, but accumulating into an undeniable pattern. I stopped sleeping, searching mortuary journals, medical literature, and toxicology reports. Nothing. No documented cases of post-mortem arterial pressure, no explanation for sudden cardiac calcification, no mechanism for muscle control after embalming. Dr. Kulkarni maintained Eleanor's death was routine. James and I recorded everything, photos, video, detailed notes. We never told the families. What could we say? That their loved one was showing impossible activity? It sounded like a horror story. We maintained professionalism, even watching the bodies subtly shift in their caskets. I investigated the connections. Different hospitals, doctors, ages, and backgrounds. Eleanor was a retired teacher, Gerald a mechanic, Linda in retail. They never met. The only commonality was the cardiac-related death and the impossible post-mortem phenomena in my room. On April 30th, I resigned. I couldn't explain why. James left 3 weeks later for a crematorium where he wouldn't have to embalm again. We don't talk about what we witnessed. I constantly think of Eleanor Voss. Were there other cases I missed in my 13 years? How many bodies did I embalm that were hovering in some state between death and whatever comes next? Eleanor had no heartbeat, no brain activity. Medically, she was dead. But hours later, blood was pumping, muscles were moving, and her cardiovascular system functioned. And something in her chest was hard as stone, impenetrable, as if guarding itself from my tools. I'm a construction worker now. I sleep better mostly. But I constantly wonder what Eleanor is doing in that sealed casket, 6 feet under Chattanooga National Cemetery. I wonder if she's still there, her eyes opening and closing in the darkness. Heart like stone, persisting in a state science cannot name. The families never knew. That is what haunts me. We gave them peace, but I have no idea what we buried. 6 months ago, I drove past the cemetery. I know exactly where her grave is. I sat in my truck for 40 minutes, unable to walk up to her grave. I couldn't do it because, deep down, I am terrified that I would sense something. That standing above her, I would feel an impossible vibration through the earth. A confirmation that what we buried is not at rest. And I am even more terrified that someday I'll read about an exhumation in Chattanooga and what the investigators will find inside.